Previously, we talked about a good sample and what a good sample is. And we said that a good sample looks like the population, all right? So it's very important that we design studies where our samples look like the population. Right now, we're going to talk about this particular type. We're going to talk about observational studies. And basically, you have two methods. Well, there are multiple methods, but the major methods we're going to focus on this year in AP Statistics are observational studies and experiments. All right? So observational studies are the most common method of collecting data. Almost all data is done that way. Surveys are included in that group. And basically, in observational studies are studies in which we gather information about subjects doing what they already are doing. In other words, we ask them, what do they like? What food do they prefer? Which one do they eat? And most studies, like I said, most studies are done this way. Most studies are done through some sort of survey, okay? Now, we have good surveys and bad surveys. We'll talk more about them later, or different types of surveys. And observational studies can be statistically significant. So observational studies can be statistically significant, and they can demonstrate a relationship or a correlation. So observational studies are very useful, and we use them a lot because they are inexpensive, easy to run, and we generally don't have the ethical issues that we might with an experiment. However, observational studies cannot show causation. This is hugely important. Causation cannot be shown through an observational study, and the reason is because treatments are not assigned. All right? Only experiments assign treatments. Only experiments can show causation. But please do not forget, observational studies can be statistically significant, and they can demonstrate relationships, association, or correlations. All right? Very important to note that only experiments can establish cause and effect relationships. So common types of observational studies are the census, which we've already talked about. And we said, a census is great because if we do it, we have the population parameter, and we really don't need the rest of this course if we can conduct a census. But we've discussed previously that it's sometimes impossible to do because of the size of the data, or it's impractical for other reasons, etc. The convenience sample is something we alluded to. We didn't specifically mention, but when we talked about surveying the 25 students in the lunchroom about the favorite song in a previous video, that would be convenient because it's easy to do. Or when we talked about the belief in God standing in front of the church, that would be convenient because it was easy to do. Unfortunately, convenience does not involve randomization, and as such, we will overrepresent part or underrepresent part of the population. So convenience samples, by their very nature, are biased, all right? So convenience samples, they're just bad. We really want to avoid these. They're going to overrepresent part of the population. It's kind of like, hey, I'm interested in economics, so I went to Wall Street and surveyed people. Well, guess what? You're going to overrepresent a part of the population and underrepresent part of the population just because of where you took the survey. Even though they're going to be very knowledgeable about economics on Wall Street, they still only represent part of the population, not all of it. We have the simple random sample, the systematic sample, the cluster sample, and the stratified sample. And we will discuss those in separate videos. But when I said that the convenience sample has a problem because there's no randomness in it, recall that we all have particular biases or preferences, if that makes you feel more comfortable. So consequently, when we determine to select something, we must involve randomness in our selection process. If we don't involve randomness, then we are going to end up with a biased selection. Also, randomness is awesome at eliminating things that we can't control for. Because ideally, when you do a study, it's like, I feel like there might be a difference between men and women. So I need some men and some women. And there might be a difference in ethnicities. And I don't know why, but I believe hair color might matter. All right, and so you start breaking it down, and you're like, well, where they grew up, what's their economic situation, What type of clothes do they wear? What is their major? And ultimately, at some point, you can't break it down enough. And since you can't break it down all the way down enough for a reasonable study, you need to involve randomness. You go, well, how does that even help? And that's one of the things I really like about you, is you ask the questions I want to answer. And this is and think about this. If I had 100 people and I wanted to create 2 equal dodgeball teams, I could probably do a pretty good job without even seeing the people, without knowing them or anything, if I put all their names in a hat and drew. Because if I did that, and the first 50 names went to one team, the next 50 names went to another hand. So all I did was put everyone in a hat and I drew. So that's pretty random. I don't know whose name's coming out. The first 50 names went to team A, the next 50 names went to team B. Chances are, just through randomization, that about half of team A would have, if there were, that each team would have about equal number of good players and equal number of bad players. That's what would generally happen just by drawing randomly. Now, they might differ by 1 or 2, but it's going to be pretty close. It's kind of like flipping a coin. In general, we know that if I flip it twice, I'm going to have 1 heads. Well, basically, if I pick somebody, it's like generally that they're going to go, half the time the good players are going to go to team A, and half the time the good players are going to go to team B, and half the time the players that are bad will go to team A, and about the other half the time they'll go to team B. So randomness really does equalize things that we cannot control for. And so randomness is a good way to equalize those differences, and it gets our individual preferences out. Okay?